Imagine a world where armored knights still ride horses, where castles dominate the horizon, and where the church defines not only faith, but knowledge itself. Now imagine that into this world, a fully functional modern airplane suddenly appears, cutting through the sky with a deafening roar, shimmering with steel, and hovering over a society that has never conceived of human flight. This is not a scene from a fantasy novel. It's a historical thought experiment. What if, in the year 1250, during the height of the European Middle Ages, the skies were torn open by a machine centuries ahead of its time? What if aircraft, symbols of our modern era, were introduced into a world governed by feudal hierarchies, religious dogma, and pre-scientific worldviews? Would this singular technological anomaly uplift civilization or collapse it? This video explores that very question. Through 6 parts, we will examine how the sudden appearance of an airplane would have impacted the medieval world, militarily, socially, politically, spiritually, and intellectually. We'll begin by looking at the world as it existed in 1250 CE. A fragmented Europe ruled by kings and popes, where technology was primitive and the sky was the realm of God alone. Then we'll consider the immediate impact of such a disruptive invention, how peasants, clergy, and nobles might react, and what sort of fear or hope it could inspire. From there, we'll explore the inevitable political conflict surrounding its control. Would the church seek to destroy it as heresy? Would a king weaponize it to conquer rivals? Would it trigger civil wars over the right to fly? As we move forward, we'll analyze the long-term consequences. Could the early introduction of flight accelerate the rise of science and modern warfare? Could it alter the timeline of the Industrial Revolution, or even prevent it? And finally, we'll reflect on the broader meaning of this hypothetical, how a single piece of advanced technology, misplaced in time, could shift the course of human history forever. In our world, history unfolded step by step. But history is not a fixed path. It is a chain of cause and effect, shaped by moments of chance, innovation, and power. This video is not about fantasy. It's about possibility. And through this possibility, we might better understand not only our past, but how fragile and flexible the timeline of our civilization truly is. Let's begin. To understand how disruptive an airplane would be to the medieval world, we must first understand what that world looked like, how people lived, how they thought, and what they feared. In the year 1250, Europe was a fractured continent. There was no nation-state as we know it today. Instead, the land was divided into countless kingdoms, duchies, principalities, and church territories. The Holy Roman Empire claimed dominance over much of Central Europe, while England, France, and other emerging powers constantly vied for territory and influence. Borders shifted with every marriage, battle, or papal decree. Society was strictly hierarchical. At the top were kings and popes, each claiming divine authority. Below them were nobles, knights, and vassals, bound by oaths of loyalty in a complex web of feudal relationships. At the bottom were the peasants, the vast majority of the population who worked the land, paid taxes, and had little say in how they were governed. But even kings bowed to a higher power, the Church. The Catholic Church was not just a religious institution. It was the most powerful and influential force in Europe. The Pope could excommunicate rulers, trigger wars, or settle disputes between monarchs. Cathedrals were not just places of worship. They were centers of political strategy, social control, and intellectual authority. To question the Church's teachings was to risk your life. And what did the Church teach about the world? that the earth was the center of the universe, that the heavens were fixed and perfect, that God governed all motion, all weather, and all life. To suggest otherwise wasn't simply foolish, it was heretical. Science, as we know it today, did not exist. Instead, knowledge was filtered through theology. Natural philosophy, the precursor to science, was heavily influenced by the writings of Aristotle and interpreted through religious doctrine. Experimentation was rare. Observation was limited. Innovation was often seen as dangerous or subversive. Technologically, the medieval world was stagnant by modern standards. Transportation was slow. People traveled by foot, horse, or wooden carts. Communication was even slower, relying on messengers and handwritten scrolls. The printing press hadn't been invented. Books were copied by hand in monasteries and were so rare they were chained to walls to prevent theft. Tools and machines were simple: the plow, the windmill, the water wheel. Castles were impressive, but they were built with manpower, not machinery. Time was measured by sundials, bells, and the movement of stars. The concept of speed, as we understand it today, barely existed. Even warfare, for all its brutality, was intimate and grounded. Battles were fought face to face with swords, bows, and blunt force. Siege engines were wooden constructs that took weeks to assemble. Aerial combat was not only unthinkable, it was impossible within the logic of their world. Social mobility was nearly non-existent. One's role in life was dictated by birth. A peasant would die a peasant. A noble would live by the sword. Education was reserved for clergy and the very wealthy. The idea of questioning authority, whether royal or religious, was dangerous, if not fatal. And yet, this world was held together by belief. Belief in God, belief in order, belief that the structure of society mirrored the structure of the cosmos. Into this tightly woven fabric of faith, hierarchy, and technological limitation, what happens when you introduce a machine that can fly? The airplane represents everything that the medieval world is not: mobility, speed, autonomy, and scientific mastery. It defies the known laws of nature and disrupts every pillar of control: political, spiritual, and cultural. Its presence would not just shock medieval society, it would destabilize it. But to see how that destabilization unfolds, we must move to the next part: the moment of arrival. Imagine the moment: a clear blue sky over a 13th century village. Peasants are tilling fields, monks are chanting in a nearby monastery, and knights are preparing for battle. Then, out of nowhere, a deafening roar. A metal beast glides across the sky, shimmering in the sun, casting a massive shadow over the land. The first airplane has arrived. The immediate reaction would be terror. To the medieval eye, an airplane would be incomprehensible. The concept of machines flying was not even in the realm of imagination. It would likely be seen as a divine or demonic sign. The common people, shaped by religious cosmology, might interpret it as a dragon, an angel, or an omen of the apocalypse. Panic would spread like wildfire. But the church would not be far behind in its response. Clerics and bishops would gather to interpret the event through Scripture. Was this a warning from God? A sign of judgment? Or, more dangerously, a work of the devil? In a time when eclipses, comets, and plagues were seen as messages from heaven, a flying machine would be viewed with deep suspicion. The church, fearing the loss of narrative control, could declare the airplane heretical, a violation of God's order. Worse yet, if it was discovered that this beast was man-made, it would shatter theological assumptions. That humans could build a machine capable of flight would challenge the belief in divine hierarchy. only angels could fly. For mortals to do so would be sacrilegious. Rulers and military leaders would see the machine differently, not as a divine sign, but as a weapon. The airplane's sheer speed and altitude would render traditional defense useless. Archers would be helpless. Castle walls would be meaningless. A single airplane, even without advanced weapons, could drop rocks, fire, or barrels of oil, and change the outcome of a siege instantly. The psychological advantage alone would be overwhelming. The balance of power would begin to collapse. Any lord or king who controlled the airplane would gain disproportionate power. Rival territories would panic, not knowing how to respond. Some might try to capture or destroy it. Others would seek to ally with its owners, offering land, soldiers, or religious pardon in exchange. Whispers of prophecy would fill the air. Some might claim the airplane is the fulfillment of biblical visions. Others could use it to justify war, claiming divine right or divine punishment. Religious fanatics might view it as the harbinger of the end times. Charismatic leaders would rise, declaring themselves chosen to control the chariot of heaven. Even among commoners, ideas would start to shift. If this flying machine is real, what else is possible? Could man touch the stars? Could there be other truths beyond what the Church teaches? The airplane would crack open the mental ceiling of medieval society, injecting a seed of doubt and possibility that could not be undone. But this newfound power would also spark fear, envy, and conflict. Who should wield it? Who deserves it? Could this single invention collapse empires, trigger wars, or unleash revolutions? The age of medieval certainty would be over. A new era of chaos and potential would begin. The instant the airplane appears, the skies no longer belong to God or angels. They become territory. And with territory comes ambition. The question is inevitable. Who will control this flying power? At first, chaos reigns. No one knows who built it, who operates it, or how it works. But every power structure, from kings and popes to rebel knights and merchant guilds, will recognize one truth. Whoever masters the airplane will rule the land beneath it. Monarchs will act quickly. Kings and emperors, obsessed with securing dominance, would likely see the airplane as a divine gift or a strategic miracle. They may attempt to seize it by force or lure its operator with gold, titles, or noble marriage. A ruler with even one operational airplane could obliterate rival castles, crush rebellions, and project fear far beyond his borders. But monarchs won't be alone in the race. The Church, still reeling from the spiritual shock, might shift tactics. If they cannot destroy the airplane, they will attempt to bless it. By declaring the airplane a heavenly chariot, or a sign of God's favor, the clergy could try to claim moral authority over its use. They might demand it be flown only for religious purposes, pilgrimages, holy wars, or divine messages from Rome. Then come the secret orders. Groups like the Knights Templar, or Teutonic Knights, who wield both sword and faith, would see in the airplane a perfect symbol of militant piety. Imagine a scenario where the Templars secretly capture the aircraft, reverse engineer it, and use it to strike fear into both Christian rivals and Muslim adversaries. A sky-bound crusade would reshape the Holy Land and Europe with fire from above. Meanwhile, rogue forces emerge. What if a rebellious nobleman gains control of the airplane, or a disgraced monk turned inventor? These figures, operating outside of established hierarchies, would use the machine to challenge the entire feudal order. They could raid towns unchallenged, blackmail kingdoms, or create a breakaway state, fortified not by land, but by air. Even merchants and early bankers might enter the fray. The airplane could represent an investment beyond gold, control of trade routes, air surveillance, and new modes of transport. Venice, Genoa, or the Hanseatic League might fund competing flying machines, ushering in a capitalist arms race centuries ahead of schedule. The battle would not be purely military. It would be ideological. Who deserves the sky? Should it belong to kings, the church, or the people? Is it a tool of God or a weapon of rebellion? The airplane, in this age, becomes more than a machine. It becomes a symbol of destiny. And thus, the war for control would not only reshape maps, it would reshape minds. A machine in the sky would force humanity to redefine who holds power and who should. The appearance of an airplane in the 13th century is not a mere disruption, it is a historical earthquake. If allowed to operate freely and understood even partially, the presence of such advanced technology would not just change battles or kingdoms, it would alter the very timeline of human development. First and foremost, the scientific revolution would begin centuries earlier. The airplane would ignite questions that the medieval mind could not ignore. Questions about physics, propulsion, aerodynamics, and mechanics. Scholars from universities in Bologna, Paris, and Oxford would abandon abstract theology in favor of practical studies. What force lifts the machine? How does it move without horses? What fuels its flight? These questions would birth a new intellectual awakening, one not rooted in scripture, but in experimentation. Trial, error, observation, concepts foundational to modern science, would gain ground far earlier. The scientific method might emerge in the 13th or 14th century instead of the 17th. This, in turn, would accelerate every branch of knowledge. Navigation would leap forward. With the dream of flight made real, cartography would become urgent. New maps, new measurements, new ways to track distance and terrain would emerge. The airplane demands a better understanding of Earth, its winds, its weather, its curves. Geography would become a scientific priority. Military tactics would evolve rapidly. The knight in shining armor would quickly become obsolete. The fortress, once a symbol of safety, would be reduced to rubble from the sky. Warfare would shift from brute force to strategic innovation. The concept of air superiority, a notion we associate with modern warfare, would be born in the medieval era. The battlefield would now include the sky. Economic development would be transformed. The airplane would hint at faster travel, perhaps even trade across vast distances. Imagine airborne messengers between distant kingdoms or small packages of spices, silk, or medicines delivered in days instead of months. This could spark the birth of logistical thinking, infrastructure, and a rudimentary form of global commerce. And politically, power would centralize around those who could understand or reproduce the technology. States that invested in science would dominate those that clung to superstition. Empires would rise not by bloodline, but by innovation. The idea of progress, once foreign to the medieval mindset, would become a driving force. The Renaissance would arrive early. Perhaps by 1350, Europe would already be experiencing a fusion of art, science, and technology. Thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci might be born into a world that already flies. And the Enlightenment? It could happen before Columbus even set sail. Colonialism, too, might take on a different shape. If flight is harnessed early, European powers could reach Africa, Asia, and the Americas far before the 15th century, changing entirely the nature of exploration and exploitation. Cultures might meet earlier, clashing or blending in ways history never saw. And finally, faith itself would change. With the sky no longer reserved for heaven, humanity would begin to see itself differently. The philosophical shift would be immense. We are no longer earthbound. We can rise. We can conquer the skies. The divine would not vanish, but it would be challenged by human ingenuity. In short, the single anomaly of an airplane in the medieval world could ignite a chain reaction that rewrites science, society, and the soul of civilization. History, as we know it, would be unrecognizable. One flying machine, just one, dropped into the medieval world of knights, castles, and holy wars. It's all it would take to shatter the timeline of human history. What we've explored so far is not just a thought experiment about an aircraft, it is a reflection on the fragility and the volatility of progress. Technology, when introduced into the wrong context, is not merely an advancement. It is a disruption, a weapon, a revelation, a revolution. The Middle Ages were a time shaped by rigid hierarchies, religious dogma, and limited understanding of the natural world. Knowledge was controlled. Innovation was feared. In such a setting, the airplane would have been a catalyst of chaos, or rebirth. It could have triggered fear among peasants, panic among kings, fury among religious leaders. Or, in a different setting, it could have inspired wonder, inquiry, and a thirst for understanding the unknown. But no matter the path, it would have proven one thing, that a single deviation, an anomaly, a spark, can bend the arc of history. The timeline of human civilization is not predetermined. It's fluid. One invention, introduced early or late, can make the difference between centuries of stagnation or an age of enlightenment. And so, when we ask, what if airplanes existed in the Middle Ages? We're not just imagining a strange historical scene. We're confronting a deeper truth, that the modern world we live in could have emerged centuries earlier, or perhaps never at all. It is a sobering reminder that every leap forward is not inevitable. Our comforts, technologies, freedoms, they are not guaranteed. They are the result of chance, timing, and the courage to challenge convention. History could have unfolded in 1,000 different ways. Our timeline is just one of them. So next time you board an airplane or look up at the sky, remember, it could have all started much earlier, or never started at all.